Have you ever noticed that the people who seem most anxious about living are often the ones who are barely alive at all? They move through their days like actors who have forgotten they are performing, reciting lines written by voices that are not their own, fulfilling obligations that feel increasingly hollow, all while something deep inside them whispers that this cannot be all there is. This is the great tragedy of the modern condition, the spiritual disease that Manly Palmer Hall recognized in his study of ancient wisdom traditions, the understanding that when we take life too seriously, we commit a form of violence against our own souls. We become so consumed with managing the surface of existence, with controlling outcomes and protecting fragile identities, that we forget the very essence of what it means to be truly alive. The ancient mystery schools understood something profound that our contemporary world has largely forgotten, that life was never meant to be a problem to be solved, but rather a dance to be experienced, a mystery to be lived, rather than conquered. When we approach existence with the heavy hand of excessive seriousness, we transform the garden of our experience into a prison of our own making. We replace wonder with worry, spontaneity with strategy, and the living present with the ghost of past regrets and the phantom of future anxieties. This is not to suggest that life should be approached frivolously or without depth, but rather to recognize that there exists a fundamental difference between sacred seriousness and ego seriousness, between the gravity that comes from recognizing the profound nature of existence and the gravity that comes from believing ourselves to be the center of a universe that demands our constant management and control. The first thing we must understand about this trap of excessive seriousness is that it represents a fundamental misidentification of who and what we actually are. When Hall spoke of the perennial philosophy, he pointed to an understanding that runs through every authentic spiritual tradition, the recognition that our true nature is not the small, separate self that feels it must constantly defend its position in the world, but rather something far more expansive and fundamentally at ease with existence. The person who takes life too seriously has forgotten this essential truth. They have become hypnotized by the drama of their own story, convinced that the narrative their mind spins about who they are and what they must accomplish is the ultimate reality rather than just one possible interpretation among infinite others. This is what the Hermetic tradition called the fall into matter, not a literal descent, but rather a forgetting of our spiritual nature, a contraction of consciousness that transforms the boundless into the bounded, the eternal into the temporary, the sacred into the merely secular. When we identify completely with this contracted sense of self, life becomes unbearably heavy, because we believe that everything depends on our personal effort, our individual success, our ability to control and manage an inherently uncontrollable universe. We become like the man in the Zen story who carries a heavy sack for miles because he has forgotten that he can simply put it down. Consider how children approach existence before the world teaches them to be serious. They play not because they are trying to achieve something, but because play itself is the natural expression of life energy, moving through a form that has not yet learned to resist it. The child building a sandcastle is not thinking about legacy or achievement. They are simply present with the joy of creation, and when the tide comes and washes it away, they laugh and run to play somewhere else. This is not ignorance or immaturity, but rather a profound wisdom that we spend the rest of our lives trying to remember, the understanding that life is fundamentally playful at its core, not in the sense of being trivial, but in the sense of being self-justifying, complete in each moment rather than constantly pointing toward some future fulfillment. The serious adult has learned to defer this completeness, to say that life will be worth living once they have achieved this goal, accumulated that resource, received this recognition, and in doing so they transform the present moment from a living reality into a mere stepping stone toward an imagined future that never quite arrives. This is the great swindle of seriousness. It promises us that our heaviness will be rewarded with eventual lightness, that our constant striving will lead to ultimate rest. But the rest never comes because we have trained ourselves in the habit of deferral. We have become experts at not being here, at not living now. The spiritual traditions that Hall studied so deeply understood this pattern and offered practices designed to break its hold. The Buddhist concept of attachment points directly to this issue. Not attachment to things themselves, but attachment to our stories about things, our insistence that reality conform to our expectations, our demand that life follow the script our ego has written. When we take life too seriously, we are demonstrating the ultimate form of attachment, attachment to our own self-importance, to the belief that our personal drama is of cosmic significance, that the universe revolves around our individual success or failure. This is not to suggest that our lives do not matter, or that we should adopt an attitude of nihilistic indifference, but rather to recognize that there is a profound difference between caring deeply and taking seriously, between engagement and grasping, between participation and control. The Taoist sage flows with the river of existence not because they do not care where they end up, but because they understand that fighting the current serves only to exhaust them, that true power comes from alignment with the deeper movements of reality, rather than resistance to them. When we release our death grip on how things must be, we discover a strange paradox. Life becomes both more significant and less serious, more meaningful precisely because we have stopped trying to force meaning into it according to our predetermined categories. This understanding has immediate practical implications for how we move through our daily existence. Notice how much energy you expend trying to control what other people think of you, how they perceive you, whether they approve or disapprove of your choices. This is seriousness at its most exhausting, the constant management of a public self that must be maintained and defended against all potential threats. The person who has learned to hold life lightly does not abandon all concern for how they show up in the world, but they recognize that other people's opinions are themselves just passing thoughts in passing minds, no more solid or permanent than clouds in the sky. They understand what Jung meant when he spoke of the persona. The mask we wear in social situations is necessary for functioning in the world, but becomes a prison when we mistake it for our true face. The seriously identified person is constantly adjusting their mask, worried that it might slip, terrified that someone might glimpse the authentic being underneath, and in this constant vigilance they exhaust themselves while simultaneously cutting themselves off from the very connection they seek. Real intimacy, real relationship, real community can only occur between authentic beings, and authenticity requires the willingness to not take our self-presentation so seriously that we are willing to risk being seen as we actually are, rather than as we wish to be perceived. The same pattern plays out in our relationship with achievement and success. The modern world has constructed an elaborate system of markers and metrics by which we are supposed to measure our worth, educational credentials, career advancement, financial accumulation, social status, and we internalize these external standards until they become the voice of our own self-judgment. The person who has fallen into excessive seriousness about life measures themselves constantly against these standards. They live in a perpetual state of evaluation, always asking whether they are ahead or behind, succeeding or failing, worthy or unworthy. This is a recipe for psychological torture because the standards are both arbitrary and infinite. There is always another level to achieve, another comparison to make, another way in which we fall short. The ancient wisdom traditions invite us to step outside this entire system of measurement, not by abandoning all goals or aspirations, but by recognizing that our fundamental worth as conscious beings is not contingent on any external achievement whatsoever. As Hall often emphasized in his lectures, the mystery schools taught that the divine spark within each person is already complete, already perfect, already whole, and that spiritual development is not about becoming something we are not, but rather about remembering and revealing what we have always been. When we truly understand this, achievement becomes something we might choose to pursue for its own sake, for the joy of creation or contribution, but not as a desperate attempt to prove our worth to ourselves or others. At this moment, I want to pause and ask you, have you noticed how you carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, as if the universe depended exclusively on your constant effort and incessant worry? That feeling that relaxing for a moment would be a betrayal of your responsibilities, as if allowing yourself lightness were the same as irresponsibility. If you are feeling this exhaustion now, this tiredness of trying to control the uncontrollable, know that you are not alone in this journey. Share in the comments just by writing "still breathing," so that other travelers know they are together in this search for a lighter way of living. Sometimes the simple act of acknowledging our exhaustion is already the first step toward freedom. Your comment may be exactly the reminder someone needed that it is possible to live fully without taking yourself so terribly seriously. I appreciate your courage to speak up, to bring your truth to this community. The relationship between seriousness and suffering is one that the Buddha himself recognized and addressed in his fundamental teaching about dukkha, often translated as suffering, but perhaps better understood as the unsatisfactoriness that pervades existence when we approach it from a place of clinging and aversion. When we take life too seriously, we are in a constant state of clinging to what we want and pushing away what we do not want, and this creates a profound friction between ourselves and reality as it actually is. The universe, in its natural state, simply unfolds according to its own laws and patterns. Seasons change, bodies age, circumstances shift, relationships evolve, and none of this requires our approval or disapproval, our acceptance or resistance. But the serious person cannot allow this natural flow. They must constantly intervene, constantly judge, constantly try to make reality conform to their preferences, and in doing so, they create an enormous amount of unnecessary suffering for themselves, and often for others as well. The spiritual path, as Hall understood it from his deep study of both Eastern and Western traditions, is not about adding more effort or more seriousness to our lives, but rather about learning to release the effort that was never necessary in the first place, about discovering that we can participate fully in existence without the exhausting heaviness of self-importance. There is a beautiful story from the Sufi tradition about a man who spends his entire life carrying a heavy stone, convinced that this burden is his destiny, his purpose, what gives his life meaning and significance. He becomes identified with his role as stone carrier. He takes pride in how well he bears this weight, how much he has sacrificed to continue carrying it, how serious and dedicated he is to his burden. One day he meets a sage who asks him why he carries the stone, and after a long conversation he realizes that there is no actual requirement for him to carry it, no commandment from God, no cosmic necessity, just a belief he adopted so long ago that he forgot it was optional. When he finally sets the stone down, he expects to feel lost or purposeless, but instead he discovers that without the stone he is free to dance, to explore, to engage with life in ways that were impossible when all his energy went into burden-bearing. This is the liberation that comes from releasing seriousness, not the loss of meaning, but the discovery of a deeper meaning that was always there beneath the weight of our self-imposed obligations. The Hermetic principle of correspondence, as above so below, offers another lens through which to understand this dynamic. When we take our small self too seriously, we are operating from a false sense of scale. We have collapsed the infinite into the finite and then wondered why life feels so constrained and limited. The person who remembers their connection to something larger than their individual story, whether we call this the divine, the cosmos, universal consciousness, or simply the mysterious ground of being, naturally holds their personal drama with a lighter touch. They can be fully engaged with their life, caring deeply about their relationships, their work, their creative expression, while simultaneously recognizing that all of this is occurring within a much vaster context that both includes and transcends their individual experience. This is what Hall meant when he spoke of living philosophically, not adopting a set of abstract beliefs, but rather allowing our understanding of universal principles to transform how we actually move through our daily existence. The philosophical life is one that can hold both the particular and the universal, that can honor the importance of individual experience while never losing sight of the greater whole within which that experience unfolds. When we examine the lives of those who seem to have mastered this art of holding life lightly, we notice certain common characteristics. They tend to have a well-developed sense of humor, not the nervous laughter that covers anxiety, but the deep humor that comes from seeing through the pretensions and posturing that most people take as ultimate reality. They can laugh at themselves, at their own tendencies toward self-importance, at the ways they still get caught in seriousness despite knowing better. This capacity for self-directed humor is not self-deprecation, but rather a form of wisdom, the recognition that the ego's drama, while real and worthy of compassion, is also somewhat absurd when seen from a larger perspective. These individuals also tend to be remarkably present. They have released so much worry about past and future that they have surplus attention available for actually experiencing the moment they find themselves in. They notice things that others miss, the play of light through leaves, the subtle emotional currents in a conversation, the beauty and strangeness of ordinary existence, precisely because they are not lost in thought about whether they are winning or losing at the game of life. The tradition of alchemy, which Hall studied extensively, provides a powerful metaphor for this transformation from heaviness to lightness. The alchemical work of turning lead into gold was never primarily about physical transformation. but rather about the spiritual process of transmuting the heavy, dense, opaque qualities of unconscious existence into the light, precious, luminous qualities of awakened awareness. Lead represents the state of being weighed down by material identification, by attachment to form, by the belief that we are nothing more than our physical bodies and social roles moving through a meaningless universe. Gold represents the recognition of our true nature as consciousness itself, as that which is aware of all experience but never trapped within any particular experience. The alchemical transformation occurs not through adding more seriousness, more effort, more striving, but rather through a process that the texts describe as solve et coagula, dissolve and reconstitute. We must first dissolve our rigid identification with our current self-image, our current story about who we are and how life must be. And in this dissolution, we may experience a temporary sense of groundlessness or confusion. But if we can remain present with this uncertainty, rather than rushing to reconstruct a new version of the old pattern, something remarkable happens. A more fluid, more authentic, more fundamentally joyful way of being begins to emerge, one that does not require the constant maintenance and defense that the serious self demanded. This brings us to one of the most challenging aspects of releasing seriousness, the fear that without it, we will become irresponsible, lazy, uncaring, that we need the whip of self-criticism and anxiety to motivate us toward constructive action. This fear reveals a deep distrust of our own nature, a belief that without external or internal coercion, we would simply collapse into indolence and selfish pleasure-seeking. But those who have actually made this transition report something quite different. They discover that when the energy previously spent on worry and self-judgment is freed up, it naturally flows toward creative engagement and authentic contribution. The motivation shifts from compulsion to inspiration, from having to do things to wanting to do things, from avoiding punishment to expressing what is genuinely alive within us. This is what Taoist philosophy means by Wu Wei, often translated as non-doing or effortless action, not the absence of action, but rather action that flows from alignment with our deeper nature, rather than from ego-driven striving. The person operating from Wu Wei may accomplish a great deal, but they do so with a quality of ease and naturalness that the serious person, with all their effort and strain, can never achieve. The practice of meditation, particularly as taught in contemplative traditions, offers a direct method for beginning to release this pattern of excessive seriousness. When we sit in meditation and simply observe the movement of our thoughts and emotions without trying to control or change them, we begin to notice how much of our mental activity is devoted to self-management, to monitoring and adjusting our internal and external presentation, to defending against perceived threats to our self-image. We see how the mind continuously spins stories about past and future, about who we are and who we should be, and how these stories create a sense of heaviness and obligation that weighs us down. But we also notice that these thoughts and stories are not solid. They arise and pass away like clouds, and that there is an awareness observing all of this that is itself naturally light, spacious, at ease. As we spend more time resting in this awareness rather than being completely identified with the thought stream, we begin to experience directly what it means to hold life more lightly, not because we have convinced ourselves intellectually that we should, but because we have tasted an alternative mode of being that is both more restful and more alive. Jung's concept of the shadow also illuminates this dynamic in a helpful way. The shadow contains all the qualities that we have rejected or repressed because they do not fit our conscious self-image, including, paradoxically, our capacity for spontaneity, playfulness, and ease. Many people have a shadow lightness, a disowned ability to not take things so seriously that they have banished because they learned early in life that being responsible, being serious, being the good child or student or employee was necessary for survival and approval. The integration of the shadow, which Jung saw as essential to the individuation process, involves reclaiming these disowned qualities and bringing them into conscious expression. This does not mean becoming irresponsible or childish, but rather developing the capacity to move fluidly between seriousness and playfulness as the situation requires, rather than being locked into one mode. The integrated person can be deeply focused and committed when focus and commitment are called for, and can shift into lightness and humor when rigidity would be counterproductive. They have access to the full range of human capacities, rather than just the narrow band that their conditioned self-image permits. As we approach the conclusion of this exploration, it is worth considering what life might actually feel like if we were to truly release our grip on excessive seriousness. Imagine waking up in the morning without immediately beginning the mental accounting of everything you must accomplish and all the ways you might fail. Imagine moving through your day with a baseline sense of okayness, a fundamental trust that life is workable even when circumstances are challenging, that you are enough even when you make mistakes, that existence itself is not a test you might fail, but rather an experience to be lived. Imagine being able to receive criticism without it destroying you, to experience success without it inflating you, to encounter change without it destabilizing you, because your sense of worth and identity is rooted in something deeper than external circumstances or other people's opinions. This is not a fantasy or an impossible ideal, but rather the natural state that emerges when we release the unnatural burden of self-importance, when we remember that we are both infinitely significant as unique expressions of consciousness and utterly insignificant in the vast scope of cosmic unfolding, and that both of these truths can be held simultaneously, without contradiction. The teaching that Manly Palmer Hall dedicated his life to sharing points us toward this remembrance. The ancient wisdom traditions, from the Egyptian mysteries to the Greek philosophical schools to the Eastern contemplative paths, all converge on the recognition that our suffering is largely self-created through our resistance to what is, our clinging to what we want, our identification with a small separate self that must constantly defend its territory. The liberation they offer is not escape from life, but rather a transformed relationship to life, one characterized by engagement without grasping, care without control, presence without anxiety. This is what it means to truly live rather than merely survive, to dance with existence rather than fight against it, to embrace the full catastrophe of being human with both tears and laughter, rather than the grim determination of those who have made life into a burden too heavy to bear. The invitation is always available. In any moment we can choose to put down the stone we have been carrying, to release the seriousness that serves only our ego's need for self-importance, to step into the lightness that is our birthright as conscious beings participating in the grand mystery of existence. If you also seek to understand how to live fully without taking yourself so terribly seriously, this channel is a space to explore together the ancient truths that can free your soul from this prison of anxiety and constant worry. Each week, we share reflections and teachings that have helped so many people find lightness in the midst of the modern tendency to turn everything into obligation and problem. Subscribe to receive these reminders of wisdom that may be exactly what you need to hear when you feel the weight of existence becoming unbearable. This community of seekers is here to remind each other that life is to be lived, not just managed, and that there is a profound joy available when we stop taking ourselves so seriously. I deeply appreciate you dedicating your time to this reflection, and I sincerely hope to continue being part of your journey toward a lighter and truer existence.